For the past several weeks, I've been doing top 10 roundups of the different types of backyard ecology content. We've talked about the videos, the blog articles, and the nature trivia style shorts. So let's wrap it up with a rundown of the top 10 podcast episodes of the year. Nature isn't just out there in some far-off exotic location. It's all around us, including right outside our doors. Hi, my name is Shannon Trimboli, and I am the host of Backyard Ecology. I invite you to join us as we ignite our curiosity and natural wonder, explore our yards and communities, and improve our local pollinator and wildlife habitat. Hi everyone! Before we get started, I want to thank all of our supporters on Patreon. Each month, they go above and beyond to financially contribute towards making the Backyard Ecology blog, podcast, and YouTube channel possible. If you would like to join them, you can do so for less than the cost of a cup of coffee or a meal at your favorite fast food place. Or if you would like to help out, but prefer to make a one-time donation, then that's also possible and greatly appreciated. I'll have links in the show notes for both those options. Like I said a couple of weeks ago, when I shared the top 10 blog articles, I always like to do roundups at the end of the year because I know how easy it is to miss stuff. So having a reminder at the end of the year for some of the episodes that others enjoyed and listened to the most can be helpful. Also, I've learned over the last couple of years that most people who listen to the podcast episodes don't read the blog articles, and vice versa. But everyone wants access to the same information. However, I was originally providing different types of information in each format, thinking that people would switch back and forth. So, to serve my audience better and make the content more accessible, this summer I began recording my blog articles and creating transcripts of my podcast conversations. Now everyone can access the new content in the format that they prefer. I like the change and have received quite a bit of positive feedback about it too. The change makes figuring out the top 10 lists for the podcast articles and podcast episodes a little more challenging this year, but I think it's worth it. So, for the purposes of this year's top 10 podcast episodes, I defined a podcast episode as a conversation that I had with another expert. I chose the top 10 that were published between October 1st, 2022 and October 1st, 2023, based on the number of downloads that the episode had received as of Thanksgiving 2023. So, here are this year's top 10 Backyard Ecology podcast episodes. Some of them were published later in the year, so have transcripts available, while others were published earlier in the year, so don't have transcripts available. There was a tie for number 9 in the list, and somewhat surprisingly, both episodes were about birds. If you enjoy watching and learning about birds, then I highly recommend both these episodes. The first episode in our tie was Everything You Want to Know About Nesting Birds with Nest Watch. In this episode, I talked with Holly Grant, who is the project assistant for Nest Watch, which is a community science program based out of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Our conversation was a lot of fun and covered a wide range of topics related to nesting birds and Nest Watch. Towards the end of our conversation, Holly shares a great tip for anyone who commonly has wrens or other birds nest in their hanging baskets or other potted plants. Holly's tip solves the problem of how to water your plant without disturbing the nest, which I know is a challenge that many people face. In fact, I asked the question because it is one that my mother has asked me many times over the years, and I never had a good answer for her. The second episode in our tie for 9th place was Birding Tools and Technology to Help You Be a Better Birder. James Wheat, the president of the Kentucky Ornithological Society, joined me for this conversation. Our conversation focused on birding tools and technology that can be helpful for birders with any experience level. We started our conversation by talking about binoculars and tips about what to look for when purchasing binoculars. Our conversation then moved to discussion of several free birding apps that can be helpful whether you are just starting out or you're already an expert birder. Number 8, exploring urban ecology, understanding and appreciating nature where we live. Despite popular misconceptions, urban ecology doesn't just apply to big cities and towns. The broad category of urban ecology applies to any place where there is a lot of interaction between that place and a nearby city or town, which means that urban ecology is likely to apply to most of us, because even in fairly rural areas, a large percentage of the population often commutes to the nearby cities or towns for work, school, shopping, etc. In this episode, we talked with Dr. Sarah Gagne. Sarah is the author of the newly published book, Nature at Your Door, Connecting with the Wild and Green in the Urban and Suburban Landscape. She is also an associate professor of landscape ecology at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Our conversation covered what urban ecology really is, ways to make your urban or suburban property more attractive to wildlife, her book, and much more. Number 7. Why are invasive species something you should care about? If you struggle with invasive species on your property and have ever thought, what's the big deal? Why are they so bad? Or wondered how they got here? Then you aren't alone. Addressing those issues and questions is exactly why I recorded this episode with Anthony. If you don't know Anthony, he's my husband and the face of the Backyard Ecology YouTube channel. Although invasive species aren't limited to just plants, that's the type of organisms that our conversation primarily focused on. We discussed a wide range of topics related to invasive species, beginning with a conversation about what exactly is an invasive species and whether those species are inherently bad. We also talked about why it matters if a species is invasive, some of the negative impacts that invasive species can have, and whether any of the short-term uses that pollinators and wildlife may gain from invasive species makes up for their negative impacts. We wrapped up our discussion by talking about how invasive species got here to begin with. Number 6. Moths, unsung heroes of pollination and beyond. Did you know that there are approximately 10 times more moth species worldwide than there are butterfly species? Or that without moths, we would have fewer songbirds, less genetic diversity in many of our native plants, and lower harvests of many popular fruits? Or that creating better moth habitats around our homes also benefits our health and well-being? In this episode, we talked with Dr. Elena Tartaglia. Elena is a co-founder of National Moth Week and a research associate at Rutgers University. We discussed the wide diversity of moths, the different roles that they play in the ecosystem, how to attract moths to your property, how to observe moths on your property, and about National Moth Week, which happens every year in July. Number 5. Gardening with Sedges, Mount Cuba Center Carex Trial. The sedges, or more specifically, members of the genus Carex, are a group of native plants which can be highly adaptable and serve multiple functions in our gardens, but which have historically been overlooked for those purposes. In this episode, we talked with Sam Hoadley, who is the manager of horticultural research at Mount Cuba Center in Delaware. At the beginning of 2023, Mount Cuba Center released their Carex trial report. This report evaluated 70 species and cultivars of Carex over 4 years for garden and landscape use in the Mid-Atlantic region. During our conversation, Sam and I talked about how Mount Cuba Center's trials are conducted, the importance of sedges or Carex species, how they can be used in the garden or home landscape, and many other topics. Number 4. How can your state's Native Plant Society help you? In this episode, we were joined by multiple guests representing native plant societies in different parts of the eastern U.S. Our guests were Randy Eckel from the Native Plant Society of New Jersey, Jeff Nelson from the Kentucky Native Plant Society, and Ellen Honeycutt from the Georgia Native Plant Society. Our conversation started out with what is seemingly a very basic question that is really much more complicated than many people realize. We also talked about all the things that native plant societies do, how they can help people at different stages of their native plant journey, and how you can get involved. Oh, and if you don't live in New Jersey, Kentucky, or Georgia, don't worry. Just about every state has a native plant society, which can be found with just a little bit of Googling, and I've yet to find one that isn't willing to try to help someone who is interested in native plants. Number 3, learning to see and identify plants with Alan Weekly. If you've ever found a plant that you didn't recognize and wanted to know what it was, then this is the episode for you. Dr. Alan Weekly joined me for this conversation. Alan is the director of the University of North Carolina's herbarium, which is located at the North Carolina Botanical Garden. He is also the author of the Flora of the Southeastern U.S. and the newly released FloraQuest app. We talked about learning to observe plants, how to identify plants, why that's important, and some exciting new tools like the FloraQuest app that are available to help us better recognize and appreciate the diversity of plants around us. Number 2, ecology-based landscaping with Larry Weiner. Do you want your yard to benefit nature while also being a place that speaks to you and is somewhere you enjoy spending time? would you love for your yard to also be a place that your neighbors admire and that inspires them to create pollinator and wildlife-friendly landscapes? In this episode of the Backyard Ecology podcast, we talked with Larry Weiner about how to achieve both those goals. Larry is a landscape designer and the founder of Larry Weiner Landscape Associates and its educational affiliate, New Directions in the American Landscape, or NDAL. He is also the author of the book, Garden Revolution. And time for the drum roll. The number one most downloaded episode published between October 1st, 2022 and October 1st, 2023 was Growing Native Plants, Insect-Plant Interactions, Playing in the Pond, and much more with Dr. Randy Eckel. You know how sometimes you'll meet someone and things just click? You quickly discover that you have lots of shared interests and experiences, and your conversation just flows as it goes down one path and then the next. Well, that's exactly what happened in this episode as I talked with Dr. Randy Eckel. Randy is the owner of Toadshade Wildflower Farm, which is a mail-order native plant nursery. She is a lifelong naturalist, lover of nature, entomologist, and confirmed plant and ecology nerd. Randy is also the president of the Native Plant Society of New Jersey. Growing native plants and interactions between plants and insects were two of the major themes in our conversation. But our conversation also went down many other twisty, curvy paths. This was one of those conversations that could so easily have occurred sitting on the front porch or around a campfire. Those are the top 10 podcast episodes of 2023. But as a bonus, I thought I would share the most downloaded episode of all time. In fact, this episode has been downloaded so many times that this fall I reshared it with a transcript to make it more accessible to a wider audience. So, our bonus is Gardening with Native Plants. The interest in gardening with native plants has been growing steadily, and I am very excited about that fact. Growing native plants in our gardens and landscapes can have many benefits, both for us as the gardeners and for the pollinators and wildlife that also call our yards home. Plus, we have some absolutely gorgeous native plants that deserve to be recognized in their own right. In this episode, we talked with Jennifer Seska about gardening with native plants. Jennifer is a conservation coordinator with the State Botanical Garden of Georgia at the University of Georgia, Athens. She and her colleagues are doing some amazing work, and I am grateful for their efforts to help others learn about and grow native plants. I hope you enjoyed that roundup of the most popular Backyard Ecology podcast episodes over the past year. Thank you so much to all of the guests who took time to have these conversations with us. If you haven't found the Backyard Ecology blog or YouTube channel yet, I encourage you to check them out as well. Until next time, I encourage you to take some time to explore the nature in your yard and community.